The moment has come. The Ukrainian armed forces are launching an offensive against the Russians in Transnistria. Putin miscalculated when he wrote his bloody scenario. An explosion in Syria. Zelensky did it. Turkey is gaining total control in the Caucasus and twisting Russia's arm. Moscow is trapped, the game is over. The Kremlin has acknowledged that Ukraine is a drone superpower. Top Russian military officials are asking to stop the terror on the front lines caused by our drones. Deaths. You have to see this with your own eyes. On the eve of the elections, the US harshly used Orban, the Hungarian. After this, Russia is not ready to take the prime minister under its wing again. This is a fiasco. Bombardment of the year. The occupiers found themselves in a triangle of strikes. All this in our episode Hell Point. Just now, an explosion in Transnistria. Putin is igniting a new front. The armed forces of Ukraine are on alert. Moldova, together with Ukraine, is preparing a strike that will destroy all of Putin's plans. You have to see this. The Kremlin is once again spewing fire and trying to drag its ally into the conflict. A tough response from our side is just around the corner. Could it be that this time it will be so powerful that it will bring down the Kremlin itself? Don't miss the first forecasts.
The Kremlin is planning to create a buffer zone in Vinnytsia region from the side of Transnistria. This statement was made in a recent interview by the deputy head of the president's office, Pavlo Palisa. The brigadier general spoke about the plans for the Russian spring-summer campaign, among which for the first time the occupiers are considering creating a buffer zone in Vinnytsia region.
The Russians' plans even include a point about creating a buffer zone in Vinnytsia region from the side of the unrecognized Transnistria. This is the first time they have recorded plans of this nature. Pavlo Palisa, Brigadier General of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
The danger from Transnistria has been discussed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The armed forces of Ukraine are prepared for possible provocations by the Russian contingent in Transnistria. And the publication of the plan is a preventive measure that deprives the enemy of the element of surprise.
There is indeed a Russian military contingent in Transnistria, as well as a pro-Russian population, which Putin can use to create additional tension and distract Ukrainian forces from other directions. Citizens should calmly perceive such information and take constructive actions. Be more vigilant, prepare the local population for possible threats, and support the country's defense readiness. Ivan Timokko, military observer.
Both specific regions, buffer zones, and even the capture, you could say, of Odessa, Mykolaiv. These are all, fantasies of the Russian Federation. They voiced them repeatedly. Putin. He mentioned this at the meeting of the Ministry of Defense Board. That is, there are no reserves, no potential, and no systemic motivation. And he understands this himself.
The deputy head of the president's office, Palisa, explained that the Russians still plan to create a buffer zone in the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv regions, as well as attempts to seize Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. In the long term, to carry out the capture of the Mykolaiv and Odessa regions.
Undoubtedly, their main focus this year will be on the Donbass. And also, if conditions are favorable for them, they will develop and intensify their efforts in the southern direction. This includes the Oleksandrivsky and the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. Pavlo Palisa, Brigadier General of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Brigadier General Palisa also said that the occupiers are constantly changing their plans and deadlines for carrying them out, since they lack the forces and means to implement them.
They announced these plans. For example, they are supposedly preparing reserves to capture the Donetsk region, which, to be frank, has been set as a goal dozens of times already. We have repeatedly noted 23 deadlines for Pokrovsk since September 2025, which were set for capturing Pokrovsk. This has not been achieved so far. I'm not even talking about Donbass, let alone 5 regions of Ukraine. In other words, it's unrealistic.
Now, according to not only Ukrainian but also British intelligence, in the armed forces of Ukraine, the situation at the front is the best it has been in the last 10 months. Ukraine has an advantage in virtually all types of drones. And the number of Russian personnel eliminated exceeds the reserves being replenished. So there can be no talk of any buffer zone, especially in Vinnytsia region. Not even close.
At this very moment, Ukraine is advancing simultaneously from several directions. Turkey, Syria, Africa. Erdogan is already speaking about Zelensky's triumph. While the Kremlin clings to the remnants of its influence, Kyiv is dismantling it around the world. It is turning Damascus away, strengthening Istanbul's influence in the Caucasus and even in Africa, turning Russian ships into targets. Ukraine's dominance can no longer be hidden. This is a global game at the end of which Putin will be the loser. You can't miss this.
Ukraine is changing the rules of the game. The gates are open. First, negotiations in Istanbul, now a trip to Damascus.
Once a humble recipient of international aid, it is now rapidly becoming a significant country that actively exports vital security assistance to others.
An alliance that will change the map of the world. And this is truly a major breakthrough for Ukrainian diplomacy. That's why the Kremlin has started to get seriously nervous.
This was not just Zelensky's initiative. There was genuine interest. Ukraine is interested in Kyiv's defense technologies.
An alliance based on shared interests, where both sides have a common adversary and a shared understanding of what the region should look like without Putin's dominance. Ukraine is actively trying to establish itself both in the Middle East and in some African countries, primarily in order to counter Russian influence and activity in various forms.
Syrian territory has long been considered as such. It is widely recognized and regarded as one of the crucial south-to-north transportation corridors for vital energy resources originating from the Middle East. It's beneficial to be friends with such a country.
For the first time since the early 2000s, Ukrainian authorities visited Syria. The delegation was accompanied by representatives from Turkey. And this is far more than simply a formal diplomatic gesture, but part of a much more intricate and multifaceted strategy.
This is a complex geopolitical game. The fundamental nature of both material and technical support, first and foremost, directly pertains to the various bodies of Ukraine's defense sector.
Damascus is moving away from the Russian military presence in Syria and does not want to remain dependent on Moscow as before.
Despite the sudden and dramatic change of the political regime, the Russians retreated from Syria in a disorganized fashion, practically leaving behind a trail of chaos. But, at the very least, they are still desperately holding on to their strategic naval base in Tartus. Currently, they are trying to negotiate some form of diplomatic settlement to maintain their presence.
The process of elimination that occurred
Of the strategic Russian military bases, It is honestly and truly just a simple matter of time before we see the final results unfold, given the current circumstances and the way things are moving forward, making the outcome certain.
Ukraine has declared its readiness to contribute to food security in the Middle East. This also opens up new promising markets for Ukrainian companies.
A number of complex issues were resolved regarding the expansion of both our countries' economic ties with several foreign partners, and primarily the possibilities for expanding military technical cooperation. With the countries of both the Persian Gulf and Syria, the issue was addressed regarding the possibility of scaling up Ukraine's successful experience in countering the enemy's aeroballistic missile threats.
Turkey needs Ukraine as a partner with real combat experience and modern warfare technologies. In addition, Turkey has been competing with Moscow for many years in the Caucasus, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Therefore, Ukraine is gradually becoming integrated into Turkey's regional strategy.
This is happening through the impact of Ukraine's defense forces on the Russian Black Sea Fleet. In fact, the Turks are watching this closely. With pleasure.
Ankara sees this as a key regional hub through which energy initiatives involving Ukraine can be implemented, because now Turkey, like many other countries, is limiting its energy cooperation with Russia, including gas agreements. As
I already mentioned, it is difficult for Russia to maintain its influence in this region with Turkey involved. All the more so because there is already such experience, for example, in Libya, where once again, Ukraine is cooperating with Turkey and providing assistance. According to the law, the Libyan government, while Russia is fighting on the other side in the civil war taking place in this country.
Libya is yet another country that is becoming a new external front in the war with Russia.
By employing these strategic methods, Ukraine is significantly broadening its overall capacity to exert substantial pressure against the Russian Federation, particularly in terms of naval blockades and complex logistics. This is about the ability to ensure security. The Russian military presence on the territory of the African continent and the countries of the Near and Middle East. First and foremost, it is about reducing the ability to gain windfall profits from the use of so-called shadow fleet tankers,
Ukrainian troops are stationed at a base in Libya with access to the sea.
Assessments of British intelligence services, the Ukrainian intelligence community. In particular, we are talking about the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the Special Operations Forces, which have reduced the presence of the Russian Federation to a historic minimum. In the Black Sea Basin, and apparently the successful experience of countering the Russian Federation in the Black Sea Basin will now be extrapolated directly to the Mediterranean Basin. In
March, a strike was carried out on a Russian tanker flying the flag of the Russian Federation. The vessel, which was carrying about 60,000 tons of liquefied natural gas, was seriously damaged. Ukraine is now attacking Russia not only in the Black Sea, but is also destroying the entire Russian export infrastructure worldwide.
The Ukrainian side has decided to push the Russian Federation out of the food and consequently the mineral fertilizer markets both in Syria and in the countries of the Persian Gulf.
This is no longer just a war for territory, but also for routes, insurance, sanctions, energy, and the right to determine where the front ends.
Yes, and first and foremost, it is a matter of Ukrainian security at the moment of reducing the capabilities of the Russian Federation, replenishing both the treasury and accordingly using the African continent as a base for its military and political presence.
Experts note that most of the agreements reached are long-term in nature, and their practical implementation will depend on further diplomatic and economic efforts. Analyzing the support for Ukraine and its alliance with other countries, it can be stated that the Kremlin is certainly not among the winners right now.
Panic in the swamps. The Ukrainian armed forces have rolled out real weapons of death, drones that even made the Akhmat fighters' ears ring. The triumph of our forces, which the Russians no longer even tried to hide, instead resorting to their usual excuses. Ukraine has made a technological breakthrough on the front, trapping Putin's army in hell. Combat birds have sharply raised the stakes, and it seems Russia has run out of trump cards. The enemy has admitted it. Ukraine is now stronger than NATO. What will happen next? Let's watch. Ukrainian drone manufacturers have managed to achieve a breakthrough in the field of drones. The manufacturers are still keeping any information about the new drones secret, but in Russia they have already started complaining that fighting against the Ukrainian armed forces has become even more difficult. In much the same way as the Great Commander did, it follows that.
Take a look at Akhmat Laudinov, who is standing there with such a remarkably sour and disgruntled face. Interestingly enough, he has not yet spoken a single word regarding the recent allegations about shooting down those advanced drones. It is important to note that these specific units are currently being produced locally through extensive industrial collaborations between Ukraine and Germany, as well as Ukraine and France. These highly modernized and sophisticated drones represent a new era of joint military technology and strategic manufacturing efforts in the region.
The drones complicate both the occupiers' logistics and their lives, and this is what Laudinov is talking about. A Martian drone. The drones operate day and night. You can't hear them only in the last seconds before detonation, as seen in the video. They are not detected by ordinary detectors and are protected against electronic warfare. Moreover, as the Russians themselves write, the build quality is very high, and there is a theory that the drone already has artificial intelligence. But Laudinov assures everyone that he knows the entire technology behind these drones. However, our experts do not agree with this.
At the tactical level, there are a number of solutions that allow bypassing Russian electronic warfare, including, for example, frequency adjustments, laying moisture-resistant cables, and so on. Abdi Laudinov himself is not a specialist in radio engineering. He is simply a talking head for Akhmat. And nothing more than that.
That is precisely why Abdi doesn't say much about these drones. He simply acknowledges the fact with a sad face. They exist and they are dangerous. Moreover, Russian soldiers have started complaining that the Ukrainian armed forces have begun attacking with drones carrying graphite bombs. No, these are not nuclear drones. The feature of this kind of weapon is that it disables equipment and electronics without physically destroying them, without demolishing the surrounding buildings.
So, as a means of damage, even without a high precision strike on a specific target, but if this graphite dust settles on wires or other elements, it already negatively affects the level of transmission and creates corresponding short circuits. If we are talking about a sophisticated air defense system in a surface-to-air missile complex, and such a munition were to impact directly upon it, yes, it may not destroy the entire complex, of course, but given its sensitive contents, it can completely sever and cut it off from any communication, and even short-circuit its delicate internal electronic connections.
Ukraine is making progress in technology, and there seems to be no end to this progressiveness, which is very pleasing. Moreover, as stated by the Ukrainian company General Chereshnya, a large underground factory will be built in Ukraine. It will manufacture components for drones together with the Croatian company ORQA, which is the largest producer of drones and components in the world. The goal is complete independence from Chinese components. So while Russia is increasing its dependence, Ukraine is strengthening its own capabilities. At the moment, Ukraine is increasing the production and modernization of drones. Moreover, it is even exporting them. Ukrainian drone manufacturing companies are among the top 100 in the world. And it seems that the demilitarization Putin wanted so badly has failed spectacularly. Just like the capture of Kiev in 2 to 3 days.
As of the year 2026, Ukraine has undoubtedly become the preeminent leading country in the entire world today when it comes to the development and deployment of various advanced drone systems, operating effectively at both the tactical and the strategic levels. In terms of precision striking of enemy targets, we certainly have a vast amount of expertise and innovative technology to share with our international partners all around the world in this regard.
The war has long since changed, becoming technological, and now the Russian tactic of taking tree lines with human wave assaults is no longer working. At the same time, Russian war correspondents are no longer confident that they can win at all.
Now, it is no longer NATO training Ukrainian soldiers, but the Ukrainian army itself. It's a bitter conclusion, but we have to accept it as it is. The Ukrainian army, Ukrainian soldiers are teaching NATO how this particular war should be fought. This is already an open secret, a secret everyone knows. If some time ago we talked about training grounds somewhere in Bavaria or Saxony where Ukrainian soldiers were being trained, now everything looks different. On these very same training grounds, NATO soldiers are now being trained. In fact, I'm going to speak bluntly, but what I see and what I feel, is a lot. I like it, but I'll say it. Of course, the Ukrainian army is stronger than the NATO army.
The so-called second army in the world can't cope with the ambitions of the old dictator Putin. And it's time to accept that.
The pre-election convulsions of Orban, the US is letting go of Putin's friend's hand and turning its gaze toward the Magyar. It has finally become clear why J.D. Vance actually came to Budapest. The moment of truth, the secret deal between Orban and Putin, a villain that has shocked the entire global community. The Russian mafia and the hidden past of the Hungarian Prime Minister. Ukraine has unmasked them. Victory is no longer in the cards for Orban. More on this in just a moment. Vance has come to save Orban. 5 days before the parliamentary elections in Hungary, the Vice President of the United States arrived to support the incumbent Prime Minister. Vice President Mike Pence became the very first American Vice President to ever visit Hungary at that point in history.
It has now been a full 35 years since that specific point in time, representing a vast period that has stretched across more than 3 entire decades, during which the world around us has undergone a truly remarkable and profound transformation in almost every imaginable way.
The US Vice President did not hold back on compliments. He highly praised Orban's leadership and called him the person who has done more than any other leader in Europe for the successful resolution of the war between Russia and Ukraine. At the same time, Vance criticized the European Union, claiming that Brussels was allegedly interfering in the parliamentary elections.
They see Orban as a destructive force within the European Union, which will allow, if not to break up the European Union from within, then at least to significantly weaken it. And this will allow the United States to dictate its will to the European Union in terms of tariffs and economic cooperation. And overall, this is Trump's ideal, which he has repeatedly stated, that the European Union should be destroyed. The European Union is supposedly a hostile organization to the United States, so it should be destroyed. Orban is helping. In fact, this is one of his main slogans, that he will oppose Brussels. So I think this is the main reason why Orban enjoys such a fierce affection from the Trump administration.
He also accused part of the Ukrainian intelligence services of attempting to influence elections in the US and Hungary. As
we can see, in principle, the disease is progressing and it has already spread to Donald Trump and his vice president. Everyone is trying to find some witches, those to blame for interfering in the American elections. We have already arrived at the 12th day of this month, and it is truly fascinating to observe just how rapidly the time seems to be slipping away as we continue to make steady progress on our scheduled tasks and objectives.
of April, Hungary will elect a new parliament. These elections are critically important for the stability of the EU and the future relations with Ukraine. Viktor Orban, whose premiership has lasted for 16 years and who is known for his pro-Russian stance, has essentially staked his entire political future. Orban is conducting an aggressive media campaign that is overflowing with disinformation. The main focus is to convince Hungarians not to support the rest of Europe in helping Ukraine. On the Fidesz party's campaign posters are the faces of Volodymyr Zelensky and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who are allegedly dragging Hungary into the war.
This is the hallmark of Russian special services. They very often try to use the language of loss in their election rhetoric. Orban, trying to demonize both Zelensky and European leaders, attempted to create an atmosphere of global fear, a threat to Hungary, and to present himself as a kind of savior. But as we can see, to deceive, Orban still fails to fool the majority of his country's population. And all of this is clearly reflected in the ratings, which constantly...
Viktor Orban is a pro-Russian leader within the EU and NATO. While most Western countries are trying to isolate themselves from the aggressor, Orban continues to build ties. According to Bloomberg, the Prime Minister of Hungary offered the Russian dictator Putin assistance in regulating the war in Ukraine and assured him of friendship. Also, in December, Hungary and Russia concluded a secret 12-point agreement aimed at strengthening ties ahead of Orban's elections, according to Politico.
Orban really loves money, and Russia is a source of unlimited, practically speaking, at least for a country like Hungary, corruption revenues. Moreover, these corruption revenues will go directly into Orban's own pocket, not, for example, into the Hungarian budget.
It turns out that the pro-Russian Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, was connected to the Russian mafia in the 1990s and received funding from them. Large sums of cash were handed over to Orban for his political campaign. This was reported by The Insider. But now Russian money is no longer helping Orban. The era of his rule is under threat. His Fidesz party is losing to the opposition TISA.
Orban not only behaves, but essentially is an authoritarian ruler who doesn't care about legality, who basically does not follow democratic traditions. Therefore, it's obvious that there are falsifications, use of administrative resources, and attempts to involve the security services. Foreign countries, primarily the Russians, all these tools are useful for Orban, and he will try his utmost to cling to power.
A change in the ruling party would mean not only a new prime minister, but also a shift in Hungary's foreign policy direction. There is no need to
expect too much from the Magyar, since he is still the leader of Hungary. In other words, Ukraine shouldn't expect much from Hungary. Ukraine does not expect Hungary to suddenly become a pro-Ukrainian country. For Ukraine, it is enough if Hungary simply is not an anti-Ukrainian country, does not block all Ukrainian decisions in the European Union, does not interfere, and does not engage in sabotage. And I think that in this regard, it will be possible to come to an agreement with any non-Orban government in Hungary.
Earlier, Western media reported that Orban might declare a state of emergency and attempt to postpone the elections or challenge their results, which could lead to a political crisis. This
is no longer just blows, it is a collapse of the system. The armed forces of Ukraine have essentially erased the line between the front and the rear for the enemy. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is rapidly losing strength, and Putin's much-vaunted air force is simply disappearing in the flames of the strikes. There is panic in the Kremlin. They admit that they have been hit by a massive drone attack, which they are unable to cope with. The security service of Ukraine acts precisely and painfully. The Russian air defense looks confused, and more often it is said that it simply does not work. And now the main intrigue is when the decisive blow will be struck. The first assessments are already in, and they are causing tension.
The flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the frigate Admiral Makarov, was destroyed by a drone of the armed forces of Ukraine. It was docked in the port of Novorossiysk. The ship was used to launch Kaliber missiles at Ukraine and was also considered the de facto flagship of the Black Sea Fleet after the sinking of the cruiser Moskva.
Well, as things stand right now, it appears that the Admiral Makarov will no longer be capable of launching any more Kaliber missiles. This represents a truly remarkable and historic achievement for the armed forces of Ukraine, and serves as an incredibly devastating and serious blow to the overall missile offensive capability of the Russian military.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine also reported the destruction of an enemy amphibious aircraft, the B-12, at the Kacha airfield. The main intelligence directorate added that the B-12 Chaika amphibious aircraft was equipped with all the necessary devices for mounting and controlling combat operations with submarines. Not only expensive weaponry, but also the main source of replenishing the Russian treasury is suffering from Ukrainian drones. For the second week in a row, strikes on oil refineries in the Baltic Sea have not stopped. The emergency services can't keep up with extinguishing fires and making repairs because drones are arriving there almost around the clock, effectively blocking the shipment of black gold.
There have now been multiple confirmed reports that the transportation of crude oil and various refined petroleum products have officially resumed operations in Ust-Luga. Some tanker arrived, was loaded, and so on. But already late at night, just this past night, there were multiple reports coming in that the joyful celebrations in Ust-Luga were quite short-lived, and yet another successful drone strike was carried out against the facility.
In addition to the ports in Ust-Luga and Primorsk, a strike was carried out on the oil terminal in Novorossiysk-Shashkaris. As a result of the strike, 6 out of 7 oil loading stands, which are used for loading and unloading oil from tankers, were damaged. This terminal is one of the largest oil and petroleum product transshipment complexes in southern Russia, and it supplies fuel to the Russian military group in Ukraine.
The Security Service of Ukraine is consistently working to reduce the enemy's military, economic, and logistical potential. Such operations will continue as long as Russia does not stop its aggression against Ukraine. Each such strike undermines the enemy's ability to finance the war and supply its troops with resources.
In fact, Ukrainian strikes on Russia's largest oil refinery have halted oil exports and consequently the flow of money into the Kremlin's coffers.
Russia exports about 250 million tons of oil and between 100 and 130 million tons of petroleum products per year. So, Shashkaris, its maximum capacity is 75 million tons. Primorsk on the Baltic Sea, which was mentioned earlier, people constantly talk about it, 74 million tons. And Ust-Luga, which became the target of another strike last night, with a capacity of about 30 million tons. If 3 ports are put out of commission, 2 on the Baltic Sea and 1 on the Black Sea, well, that's roughly half of Russia's oil exports that for a certain period would be halted.
Recently, the Ukrainian armed forces have been attacking Russia much more frequently and effectively than the Russian army does. According to official data, Russian air defense intercepted 7,440 Ukrainian UAVs of various types in the month of March. How many actually reached their targets is unknown. In turn, Ukrainian air defense shot down 5,935 Shaheds and other types of UAVs. This accounted for 89.8% of the targets shot down. What does it mean that for the first time since the beginning of the war, Ukraine has seized the initiative in such strikes? Previously, the number of drone attacks was considered a serious advantage for the Russian army. Now, the Ukrainian defense industry has managed to overcome its lag in UAV production, and the strikes have become so effective and large-scale that the Kremlin no longer knows how to stop them.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hutsakalo. Even more explosive news in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.